From albino swallows struggling to survive to fungi that actually feed on radiation and mutant pine trees. These are more terrifying Chernobyl mutations. After the Chernobyl disaster, one of the first obvious signs of mutation was in the local bird populations. Researchers started noticing barn swallows with bright white patches, a condition called partial albinism, which is rare under normal circumstances. And along with the odd coloring though, some birds had twisted beaks, deformed toes, and strangely shaped tail feathers. These weren't just small defects either. Some of the beak deformities made it almost impossible for the birds to feed properly. According to studies published in journals like Biological Conservation, these mutations were especially common within the highly contaminated areas closest to the reactor. The birds' survival rates were much lower than normal too. A lot of the albino swallows didn't make it through their first year. Scientists figure the radiation damaged their DNA, leading to these visible abnormalities. Interestingly, the frequency of these mutations actually gives researchers clues about how dangerous certain areas still are today. High numbers of mutated swallows usually means higher residual radiation levels. Even now, generations later, you could still find birds around Chernobyl with unusual markings or growth defects. Inside Chernobyl, scientists discovered something totally unexpected. Some species of fungi show a phenomenon called radiotropism, where instead of growing toward light like normal plants, these fungi actually grow toward radioactive material. According to research shared by the National Institutes of Health, these fungi use melanin, the same pigment that gives human skin its color, to absorb radiation and turn it into energy. Almost like photosynthesis, but instead of using sunlight, they're using deadly gamma rays. So not only can these fungi handle huge doses of radiation that would kill most living things, they actually prefer it. Samples were even brought up to the International Space Station to see how they would react to cosmic radiation, and again, they were just fine. One of the eeriest sights in Chernobyl is the Red Forest, a place where pine trees absorbed so much radiation that they turned rusty red before dying. But some trees didn't just die, they mutated. According to the BBC, researchers noticed that a lot of pine trees developed strange needles. Instead of fanning out like normal, their needles were clumped together in these thick, tangled bunches. In some cases, the trees looked almost like natural bonsai, stunted, twisted, sometimes missing their tops completely. Normally, pines grow in a clean, upward pointing shape, but radiation damage scrambled their growth patterns. Mutations affected how cells divided and how these trees structured their branches and leaves. Some trees stayed abnormally small even decades later, others grew in these chaotic, knotted shapes. Scientists say the Red Forest today is one of the most radioactive outdoor places on Earth, so it makes sense that the trees would be kinda messed up. While a lot of animals around Chernobyl died off after the meltdown, some species, like the bank vole, a small rodent, adapted pretty well. According to a study in Nature Communications, these rodents show clear signs of genetic damage. Their DNA has more breaks and mutations compared to voles living outside the zone. But instead of dying out, a lot of them have somehow developed to better repair their DNA. It's not that the radiation didn't mess them up, it absolutely did. Researchers just found evidence of abnormalities. What's crazy though is that these voles are still surviving in one of the most contaminated parts of the world. Some scientists think natural selection favored ones that could fix their damaged DNA better, allowing them to pass those traits on. Rotifers, microscopic animals that live in fresh water, have been studied in Chernobyl's contaminated ponds. According to Frontiers in Microbiology, researchers found that rotifers from the exclusion zone can survive much higher doses of radiation than ones outside it. Instead of just dying from DNA damage like you'd expect, these rotifers seem to have upgraded at a cellular level. They developed better systems of repairing their DNA, and possibly even in ways to protect it from radiation damage in the first place. Rotifers are already known for surviving crazy conditions like being frozen solid or dried out for years, but Chernobyl pushed them even further. These little guys adapted in a way that scientists are still trying to fully understand. And now, some researchers are looking into whether the rotifers' abilities could help humans or other animals deal with radiation better one day. Right after the Chernobyl explosion, researchers started noticing that insects were showing some changes. Beetles and grasshoppers with missing parts became pretty common. The worst mutations showed up in areas closest to the reactor, where radiation levels were just off the charts, of course. Insects would hatch with warped or missing body parts that made it almost impossible for them to survive. Wings would come out crumpled, antennae, which insects need to sense their environment, would be stubs or just completely gone. Some beetles had legs growing in the wrong places or extra limbs. Scientists were able to connect the number and severity of deformities directly to how much radiation the insects were exposed to. The first few years after the disaster saw the worst of it, obviously. Over time, the number of severe mutations dropped, mostly because the most damaged insects didn't survive to reproduce. After the Chernobyl disaster, a group of wild Przewalski's horses, an endangered species, was introduced into the exclusion zone in the late 90s. These horses actually started doing pretty well in the abandoned human-free landscape, but not everything was normal. Researchers noticed that some of the horses were being born with these strange physical defects, like shortened, scruffy manes and unusually stubby tails. The deformities weren't as extreme as some other animals, but there was still a lot of concern about whether radiation exposure had messed with the horse's development. Normally, Przewalski's horses have thick, upright manes and long tails, which help protect them from insects and the elements, but these Chernobyl ones looked rougher. There's still debate about whether the radiation is the direct cause or if it's more about poor nutrition in the contaminated environment, but either way, the odd physical changes were real. Not everything in Chernobyl shrank or mutated into weird broken shapes. Some plants actually grew bigger. Certain species of moss, mushrooms, and ferns in the exclusion zone started showing signs of gigantism after the disaster. According to the Journal of Environmental Radioactivity, radiation seems to have messed with the genes that control how these plants grow. Instead of growing normally, some plants ended up with these oversized leaves or unusually thick stems. It's believed that the radiation disrupted the normal signals that tell plants when to stop growing, leading to these bizarre, almost monster-like versions. In some parts of the Red Forest, ferns grew much larger than expected, and certain mushrooms popped up freakishly big. Scientists think this is because mutations either removed natural growth limits or somehow activated dormant genetic traits. Of course, just because a plant is bigger though doesn't mean it's healthier. A lot of these oversized plants had heavy radioactive contamination. Research has shown that birds living in the most radioactive areas around Chernobyl had brains that were about 15% smaller than birds from clean areas. Researchers think that radiation exposure during development damaged cells in their brain, either killing them off or stopping them from forming properly. They found that younger birds had it worse than adults, meaning that radiation was having a serious effect during the earliest stages of life. And those birds with smaller brains, unsurprisingly, had lower survival rates. What you're looking at here is the only known photograph of a creature known as the Blackbird of Chernobyl. In early April of 1986, people living around the Chernobyl nuclear power plant started reporting something strange. Witnesses described seeing this huge, dark creature, like a man, but without a head. It had massive wings and glowing red eyes. Locals started calling it the Blackbird of Chernobyl. Sightings of this thing kept piling up, right up until the morning of April 26th, when Reactor 4 exploded. That disaster unleashed a radioactive cloud that spread across parts of the Soviet Union, Europe, and North America. The area around Chernobyl was just devastated. Over 300,000 people had to evacuate, still considered the worst nuclear accident in human history. In the chaos after the explosion, though, Soviet helicopters dumped sand, lead, and other materials onto the burning reactor, trying to smother the fire. Firefighters, not realizing they were dealing with a radioactive inferno, rushed in, often without proper protection. A lot of them would die soon after the radiation poisoning, including Lieutenant Vladimir Pravik, who passed away just weeks later. But some of those firefighters who survived long enough to talk, well, they reported seeing this massive, dark, winged creature flying through the radioactive smoke above Reactor 4. After the meltdown, sightings of the Blackbird stopped completely. Some people believe that the Blackbird of Chernobyl was the same kind of entity as the Mothman, the creature seen in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, before the Silver Bridge collapsed in 1967. Both creatures had similar appearances, giant wings, red eyes, and in both cases, there were also reports of nightmares and strange, threatening phone calls before disaster struck. Another theory is that people might have actually been seeing a black stork, but the black stork only has a 6-foot wingspan, not 20. And that bird doesn't explain the terrifying dreams and phone calls that witnesses talked about. Whatever the Blackbird really was, though, it hasn't been seen again since Chernobyl. Whether it's a warning, a bad omen, or just mass hysteria, no one really knows. But if it ever shows up again, history says something very bad might not be far behind. With all that said, I've been your host, James, and I will catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.